project, I created 7 tables. When creating this database, pretending I was an HIT manager, I did create this in the thoughts that this could eventually be expanded to use a similar registry for other purposes. The main patient table was the demographics table, which keeps track of all the pertinent patient data, the name, address, sex, date of birth, and the patient ID number, which is a unique and the primary key. Another piece of information that I included in this demographics table includes patient ethnicity. It's typically kept in our EHR demographic information, but I felt it was important to include because according to Kopstead and Banasic in 2010, some groups are at increased risk for the complications of diabetes, including nerve and kidney issues. There may be some value later in the reports pulling those groups to keep a closer eye on their kidney function or glycemic control tests in these higher risk groups. The final field in the demographic table is the diagnosis. For this purpose, it keeps track of whether the patient has been diagnosed with type 1 or type 2 or prediabetes. Again, this field could be added upon if this was going to keep track of other chronic ailments. Both the diagnosis and ethnicity fields are foreign keys and are linked to several tables. This ethnic origin table as a foreign key, as well as this diabetes diagnosis field. If there was going to be expansion to include asthma or some other ailments, that would not impact my demographics field at all. And also, by having this linked to a primary key, it also verifies that people aren't going to misspell words or put something in there that I don't want in my table. For example, other words or other ethnicities that aren't exactly what I'm looking for, which would make querying later harder. So we're going to look at my database right now of how it's actually set up. So we're going to go into the demographics table. As you can see, the patient ID is the primary key. We have the patient last name, first name, sex, address, city, zip are all various characters, kind of free form. You also have the date of birth. It's coded as a date. And again, this foreign key, the diagnosis, and the ethnicity are both integers. And we can see that if we go into the ethnic origin table, I do have an integer, and then my description is free text. And we can go into my diabetes diagnosis, and it's similarly set up. The remainder of the tables are linked through the primary key of the patient ID number. So for each patient ID, their information or data is going to be kept in the different tables. So there's a glycemic lab work, which includes the lab work date, their A1C level, the fasting glucose, and the 2-hour glucose tolerance test. There is also the patient assessment table, which includes the patient's height, weight, systolic and diastolic blood pressure, as well as the date that this is taken. I kept the systolic and diastolic blood pressure separately to allow for easy querying to find those outside of the ranges. So if I'm looking for both a systolic above one level and a diastolic above one level, it make my query a lot easier than having blood pressure as one field. I had height and weight collected in meters and kilograms. And looking at my patient assessment tab, you can see that, or patient assessment table, you can see that my patient ID, again, is the primary key. I have my assessment date as a date. My systolic and diastolic are integers up to 3 numbers. Height and weight, again, are set into decimals. My height, 3 places with 2 decimal points, 2 places after the decimal point, and my weight, I allowed for four digits, again with 1 decimal place. And I'm also tracking in this table tobacco use. This should be a simple yes or no answer. I'm not looking for packs per day or anything else. I'm just looking for a yes or no answer. So I limited my characters to 3 so that somebody doesn't get a little wild in there and put extra things in there that I do not want to query against. My microvascular history is very similar. Again, I have my patient ID. I have my date of my last eye exam, which is formatted in the date. I have a retinopathy diagnosis, whether there is one and what that would be. I have my BUN, creatinine, and glomerular filtration rate. All of those measure kidney health. Again, they are lab values, so I want them in decimals. And depending on my normals is where I had my decimal places added. And then finally, whether an ACE inhibitor or a ARB inhibitor is prescribed is also that table, since blood pressure medications, use of these blood pressure medications are associated with increased microvascular health, and that may be something that a provider might want to keep track of to see if in fact that is something that is being prescribed to the patient. I set up the coronary health table, again very similar. I have my triglycerides, LDL cholesterol, or low density cholesterol, or my bad cholesterol, and my high density lipids, or my good cholesterol. And then I have my BNP, or my B-type natriuretic peptide, which measures the level of heart failure. Again, keeping an eye on that heart health in general. All of those are whole numbers, because that's how the lab values are. And that's really all my tables. Please be aware that there are some pertinent measures that can be calculated from the collected data. For example, BMI can be calculated from the queries that are run from the data, input into the data. The equation simply takes the weight in kilograms and divides it by the square of the weight in kilograms, or age can be determined using that date of birth. So you can see that I did create tables. Here's my script to create the tables, and then I have my adding my values. That's how all of my data ended up in my tables. And then I do have my select statements, where I can show the data. So again, I have my patient ID, my last name, first name, my sex, date of birth, address, city, state, zip code, diabetes, ethnicity. I have my diagnosis field. Again, this could be expanded if I needed to. I have my ethnicity. I have my patient ID and my triglycerides, LDL, HDL, and my BNP for my coronary labs. Then I have my glycemic labs, which includes that A1C. I have my fasting glucose. I have my GTT. As you can see, not everybody has a GTT. And if you go back to my demographic field, you'll notice that anybody with a type 1 diagnosis is not going to have a GTT. Patient 1 does not have a glucose tolerance test. Again, type 1 diabetes has nothing to do with tolerance. You have no tolerance because your pancreas is not working at all. Microvascular, my lab values. Again, I have my patient ID, I have my date of my last eye exam, my retinopathy diagnosis. Again, not everybody has a diagnosis. And then I have my 3 levels, pre-proliferative, my proliferative, and my background. And then some people have none. And then I have my kidney function test, my BUN, my creatinine, GFR, and again, whether or not an ACE inhibitor or ARB has been prescribed. And finally, I have my assessment table, my patient ID, assessment date, systolic, diastolic, whether they're a tobacco user, their height in kilograms, and their height in meters, and their weight in kilograms. Again, I can use this if I were going to build some reports to get the BMI or anything else. If I truly were the HIT manager, I would be discussing that snapshot a little bit further with my providers to truly understand what they wanted and what they envisioned. Again, this is from research, from things that exist out there, and aren't necessarily what an inpatient provider may be looking for. So anyway, thank you very much, and I hope you have a great day. Bye.